There's a moment near the end of Shameless where Carl Gallagher stands in a police uniform, badge on his chest, looking completely at home in it. If you'd shown that image to anyone watching the first season, the kid setting off explosives in the garage, torturing the neighborhood cats, treating a stolen gun like a toy, they wouldn't believe it was the same person. Some of them still don't, 10 years later, arguing about it in comment sections under every clip of grown-up Carl in uniform. Hold on to that image, because we're coming back to it. Because the uniform isn't really the twist people think it is. It's the answer to a question the show's been quietly asking about Carl since he was 12 years old. Every Gallagher sibling gets a defining relationship in this show. Fiona is the mother figure. Lip is the genius everyone's betting on. Ian eventually finds Mickey. Debbie finds motherhood, messy as it is. Even Frank, for all his damage, has Monica, has the bar, has people who keep circling back to him no matter how badly he treats them. Carl doesn't get one of those. Go back through 11 seasons and try to name the one person who is unambiguously Carl's. The way Mickey is Ian's, the way the alibi regulars are Kev and V's. You can't. Not really. What Carl gets instead, over and over, are structures. Juvenile hall, military school, the police academy. Every single time the show hands Carl something stable, it isn't a person. It's an institution. That's the pattern this video is going to make the case for, and I think once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it in a single scene of this kid's life. It's worth sitting with how different this actually is from everyone else in the house. Even Kev and V, who aren't blood family at all, function as a kind of chosen family for whoever needs them that week. Lip crashes there, Debbie leans on V, even Frank treats the alibi like a second living room. There's an entire found family structure operating around the edges of this show. Carl is rarely part of it. He's present in scenes, sure, but he's almost never the one anyone's checking in on. He's the one causing the scene that makes someone else check in on somebody else. Start with the early seasons, because this is where most people stop paying attention to Carl. He's comic relief, the one doing something deranged in the background while the actual plot happens to his older siblings. But look at what's actually driving the behavior. Carl isn't just a violent kid for the sake of a joke. He's a kid getting essentially zero consistent adult attention in a house where Fiona is stretched between 6 people and Frank is rarely sober enough to notice anyone. Guns, explosives, small-scale drug dealing, animal cruelty, all of it reads as chaos on the surface. Underneath it, it's one of the only reliable ways Carl gets anyone to actually look at him. That's not a redemption of the behavior. It's genuinely disturbing, and the show never fully pretends otherwise. But it reframes what happens next, because everything that looks like punishment in Carl's story is actually the first thing that ever shows up for him on a schedule. Take military school. On paper, it's a consequence. Carl gets shipped off because he's become too much for the house to handle, and for a while, it plays like the show quietly writing the character out. But watch what Carl actually does with it. He doesn't resent the structure. He thrives inside it, in a way he's never thrived inside anything before. Rules that don't change depending on how drunk his father is. A schedule that exists whether or not anyone at home remembers he's alive. For most of the Gallaghers, an institution taking over their life would read as a loss of freedom. For Carl, it reads as the first time anyone's ever been reliable. When he comes home again, it doesn't fully take. He slots back into the house, back into the chaos, back into being the sibling nobody quite has a role for. And it doesn't take long before you can feel him missing the thing he never would have said out loud that he needed. Somewhere with a schedule, a rank structure, a reason to get up that didn't depend on whether anyone in the house remembered he existed that day. There's a smaller moment that gets treated as a punchline, but says more about him than almost anything else in the show. Still a teenager, Carl gets swept up in a rushed, impulsive marriage to a girl named Kassidi, young enough that the marriage isn't even legally binding, arranged in secret because neither family would support it. It plays, on the surface, like typical Carl chaos, one more reckless decision in a life full of them. But look at what he's actually reaching for. He's not chasing romance. He's chasing permanence so badly that he's willing to fake his way into a legal bond with someone he barely knows how to be in a relationship with. It's the same hunger that sends him gladly into military school a season later, just aimed at a person instead of an institution. And notably, it's the version that doesn't work. Kassidi can't hold him the way the structure can. Which brings us to the part of Carl's story people online can't stop arguing about: the choice, as an adult, to become a cop. For a kid whose entire childhood is defined by run-ins with the police, stolen weapons, juvenile charges, a rap sheet that would follow most people for the rest of their life, putting on a badge looks, at first glance, like the strangest possible ending. Some corners of the fandom read it as a betrayal of the character, or worse, as the show quietly endorsing policing without examining what that means for a kid who grew up on the other side of it. I don't think that reading is wrong, exactly. But I think it's incomplete because it treats the badge as the point, when I don't think it is. Carl doesn't become a cop because he suddenly believes in law and order. Go back to what actually draws him toward the job. It's not the authority. It's officer tipping, a partner who shows up, who's consistent, who treats their beat almost like a family business, at one point wanting to turn the Gallagher's own bar into a cop hangout. Carl isn't chasing power over the neighborhood he grew up in. He's chasing the exact same thing military school gave him, a structure that will have him permanently, that doesn't require anyone to love him first. It doesn't come easily either, which matters. His first posting is parking enforcement, about as far from the tough, respected version of policing as the job gets, and a genuine letdown for a kid who signed up expecting something closer to purpose. He sticks with it anyway. Not because the job itself is glamorous, but because for the first time, quitting isn't really on the table the way walking away from a relationship always has been. The badge doesn't require him to be lovable. It just requires him to show up. Here's what I think is actually happening underneath all three of these choices, and it's worth saying plainly instead of letting the pattern speak for itself. Carl was never actually looking for trouble, and he was never actually looking for authority either. He was looking for the one thing none of his siblings ever had to look very hard for: somewhere that wouldn't leave. Every other Gallagher eventually gets that from a person. Carl gets it from a uniform 3 separate times, because a uniform is the only kind of commitment this family ever consistently modeled for him. And here's the detail that should change how you read his ending, because it's easy to miss if you're only watching for plot. By the finale, every other Gallagher sibling has landed somewhere with someone. Lip has Tammy and their son. Ian has Mickey. Even Debbie, Chaos and all, has a daughter who's hers. Carl has none of that. He's not dating anyone. He's not building toward anyone. The show doesn't even tease it. He's simply, quietly, alone in the one category every other sibling gets resolution in. It would be easy to read that as Carl finally being fine on his own, self-sufficient in a way his siblings aren't. I don't think that's it. I think it's the clearest evidence in the whole show for what this video has been arguing from the beginning, that Carl never actually learned how to be held onto by a person because nothing in his childhood ever taught him that a person could do that reliably. Institutions could. So institutions are what he ends up choosing over and over, right up to the end. Remember that image from the beginning. Carl in uniform, looking completely at home in it? This is where it lands. It's not really about policing, and it was never really about redemption either, the two things people keep arguing about in the comments. It's about a kid who spent his entire childhood learning that the only things that show up reliably are rules, schedules, and institutions, and who grew into an adult who finally found one that would keep him, not a person who chose him, a structure he could belong to instead. Every other sibling in this family gets a person by the end. Carl gets a badge, a partner who's really more of a work friend than a family, and a uniform that fits him better than anything ever has. That's not really a happy ending, even though the show frames it like one. It's the quietest, least examined tragedy in the entire Gallagher family. The one sibling who never had someone, dressed up as the one sibling who finally has it together. He didn't find a person. He found the closest thing this family ever gave him to one. And maybe that's the more honest read on Carl Gallagher, buried under 11 seasons of him being the show's comic relief. He was never actually the funny one. He was the one nobody bothered to really see. Right up until the moment he put on a uniform, and suddenly everyone had an opinion about him.